Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jillian, and I work in the curatorial programs team here at the gallery. Thank you for joining us for today's program, Learner's License, an Artist Educators panel, in conjunction with Georgette Chen at Home in the World. Georgette Chen became the first woman to teach at the pioneering Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts in 1954. She taught there for 26 years until her retirement in 1980. During her time at NAFA, she shaped the lives and practices of many of Singapore's well-known artists. Over the course of their research for the exhibition, the curators spoke with many of Chen's previous students, who remembered her fondly and expressed their deep gratitude for her mentorship. Today's panel celebrates Chen's pioneering spirit and her many contributions in this field. We're very excited to have with us today an esteemed panel of practicing artist educators who will discuss their approaches towards the work of molding the next generation of thinkers and makers. On the panel today, we have our first speaker, Sek-Chern. Sek-Chern holds a BA from NAFA and an MFA from Goldsmiths College. She is best known for her Chinese ink interpretations of the Singapore urban landscape, which have won her several awards, including the 26th UOB Painting of the Year Grand Prize. Her works are part of several institutions and prestigious collections, including Singapore Art Museum and Taipei Fine Art Museum. She currently teaches at her alma mater, NAFA. Next, we have Adeline Kueh. Adeline makes installations, photography, and embodied works that reconsider the relationship that we have with things and rituals around us. Her work acts as modern-day totems that explore the personal histories and overlooked moments. Currently a senior lecturer in the MA Fine Arts program at La Salle College of the Arts, Adeline is part of STPI's Visiting Arts Program residency in 2021. Our next speaker is Mike HJ Chang. Mike is a Taiwanese-American artist and educator who currently is based in Singapore. He received his BA from the University of California, Los Angeles, and his MFA from the California Institute of the Arts. Drawing is a staple in Chang's practice, from which he sees his painting, sculpture, installation, and time-based work extending. He currently teaches at Nanyang Girls High School. Our final speaker for today is Zarina Muhammad. Zarina's practice is deeply entwined with a critical re-examination of ethnographic literature and historiographic accounts of Southeast Asia. Her recent exhibitions include the President's Young Talents, 2018, at Singapore Art Museum, and Stories We Tell to Scare Ourselves With, at MOCA Taipei in 2019. She is currently lecturer in fine arts at La Salle. Our moderator today is Erica Lai. Erica is a dear colleague of mine here in the curatorial programs team at the gallery. She's recently developed programs for exhibitions such as Awakenings, Art and Society in Asia, 1960s to 1990s, and Wu Guanzong, Expressions of Pen and Palette. She is also an artist whose practice examines the politics behind spaces and activities that are deemed safe and secure. Before joining the gallery, Erica was previously program leader at NAFA. Before we start, just a note to say that there'll be time for questions. So please do leave your questions in the comments box for our speakers. Without further ado, I'd like to now hand over to Erica to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. Thank you, first of all, Zarina, Adeline, Sek-Chern, and Mike, for joining us today. I think this is like a precious opportunity, super precious opportunity to gather and to chat. Today, we will actually discuss about, two types of practice, very intertwined, okay? So basically about art practice and also about education. Art education in its various forms has also been instrumental in shaping the landscape of practitioners, about thinkers for future generations. So I think this is something that is especially, pertinent to the arts industry. Teaching and practicing and teaching, I think, the artist educator is actually a very kind of common mode of practice for many artists for various reasons. And so perhaps before we start, could I invite each of you to maybe introduce yourself as an educator and just share a little bit about maybe an interesting story or even as what do you teach and where do you teach? Thank you. Yeah, maybe we can start with Zarina.
Okay, hi, I'm Zarina. Thank you so much for this invitation and for this opportunity to have this conversation. So I teach at LaSalle College of the Arts. I teach in the BA and the diploma program. So it's quite a broad range of ages of students, I think. And I teach across the studio practice modules as well as the contextual studies, critical thinking studies modules. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hi, I'm Adeline Kueh. Thank you for having me here. I'm currently teaching with the MA Fine Arts program. Of course, clearly we do teach in the BA as well, but I would say that I've been very privileged to have had graduate students who are already practitioners. So the approach to teaching them is clearly very different because they already come with their practice and their existing exhibition records. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sek-Chern?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm Sek-Chern, and I've been teaching, I guess, on and off for quite a long time. And right now I am teaching part-time at Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts. Specifically, I was invited in to teach again after a hiatus for about 10 years. I was just doing full-time art. I was invited to go back into specifically to teach Chinese ink painting, which is a traditional subject. And we've always had a bit of a problem, how we can teach to the younger people, and especially people who are not Chinese. So it was quite a good challenge, and I really enjoy teaching the students, and they are at the second year level, so it's just really more like foundation sort of thing. And yeah, I think it's an interesting way to relook at old medium, and I think I have gained quite a bit from it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Mike?
I'm Mike. Thank you for having me. I teach at secondary school. I teach specifically more Sec 3 and Sec 4s. It's called the Art Elective program. So we do a lot of different things. We do sculptures, paintings, digital art. So yeah, I teach a little bit of everything. I'm trying to expose to them different mediums and different genres of art. And on top of studio practice, we also do introduction to art history and theories. So yeah. And I've been doing this about 10 years already.
Wow, okay, so we have, I think, close to 50 years of
More
experience between us.
Yes,
Okay,
definitely
sound
more.
old. Okay, maybe we could just also learn a little bit more about, what was your personal journey? I think a lot of artists, they teach for various reasons. One, of course, is very much like Georgette was about, bread and butter. She needed also a way to have a sort of stable income and all that. So that was one reason why she taught. But I'm just really curious to find out, each of you, what would be your journey in that educating? Because I can understand that everyone started out really thinking about being an artist and also about even writer, So I think maybe I can find out a little bit more. Yeah, shall we? We can start anywhere. Maybe Adeline?
Sure. Okay. For me, I come from having had amazing teachers at various stages of my life, and if there's one thing, it's that knowledge is power. And from there, with those teachers who are very caring and empowering, I've come to understand and embrace the idea that therefore that knowledge ought to be shared. So we start from that. And I've been very lucky when I finished my master's, and my first job at LaSalle was through Brother Joseph McNally and a couple of other instrumental persons who actually groomed and entrusted us with the responsibility to build the school to where it is today. And that's something that's quite positive, and it's a touchstone.
Yeah, I mean, I think I absolutely agree, right? That knowledge is power, and I do feel that I think the years, my formative years of study, when I think about secondary school, where I came from a school where I felt there was a pretty strong feminist sort of energy. And I mean, I think we learn so much from our teachers. I mean, from the wonderful ones, but also the ones who have, we scarred us. So, I think there's a lot that I feel like, what we're doing now is about unlearning, relearning as well. So my background, I studied gender studies, fine arts, and English literature formally. And then Adeline was actually one of my lecturers for an MA when I was doing my MA in art history. And you also interviewed me.
Yes, I did.
When I was applying for a job.
Yes,
so I need to acknowledge that.
Yes.
Thank you, Adeline.
Thank you. Now we need like-minded people, really, to be in the position where we're educating the newer generations of artists. And I'm actually very proud to be sitting here together with everyone that I respect a lot. So, thank you.
Wonderful. Maybe I can.
My whole education, I'm very studio based. Like I've been, I studied in the States, and I've been, I guess, trying to become an artist. And throughout this sort of journey, my practice sort of has become a very sort of studio based practice, and eventually that sort of found a way for me to think about how do I translate this process to younger students.
Right.
And I think it's at first it's not so easy because they're pretty young. They're 14, 15. They don't have this idea of a practice. Art is just another subject in their curriculum.
Right.
So for me, the challenge is how do I get them to be interested in investing a lot of time and energy into thinking about art and developing their own style, developing their own thinking. And that, in a way, that has helped me sort of think and rethink about my own process as well. So somehow it makes sense. And every year I'm very happy to work with different group of students and sort of re-challenging myself and rethinking about my own ideas in many ways. So yeah, so I've been enjoying it quite a lot. It's never easy, and I think both like teaching as well as artistic practice. I think what excites me or us is the unknown. There's always a possibility to get somewhere, and there's never really a limit. So both in teaching and practicing, I think it's about this sort of intuition to search for something else.
Right.
And those two things kind of, in some ways, found each other in my life. So yeah.
I mean, Mike, maybe to expand on that, like in terms of like being educated in the United States, and it's probably quite different from, especially within a a sort of government school and having its own systems. Is there do you find that you need to reconcile anything or put in?
I didn't study a lot art in high school. I only really did art in university. So I really look at that as the model of my own sort of thinking about pedagogy. It's like the professors are, in some way, your peers. They don't really teach you anything, but just being there and just do discussions and hang out with your friends. And I think learning with your peers actually is as important as you learn from your professors. So everybody has their own practice, and in a way you learn because you spend time together and you do your own things, but you share. So creating that environment is ultimately the most important thing for the classroom. Is a place that's safe to share, even though you might not be very good at it yet, but it's to find ways to get better at it. So I think that's my sort of model of thinking about education here also. For very young people.
Very young. Okay, last but not least, maybe Sek-Chern.
Okay. So the thing about, I think it must be because like what Zarina said, we do get scarred by teachers since really young. And I think I'm very unfortunate in the sense that when I was younger, I haven't met really good, inspiring teachers, unfortunately. This, I think, is really luck. So much so that I think when I was like 16-year-old or so, I was thinking, I must look for a good teacher. There must be someone there who can teach me what I need to know. So in that sense, perhaps that kind of shaped where I decided to go, because right after that, I went to university, I did math and science.
Bravo.
Math and physics. Right?
Bravo.
Physics teach me a lot of things. It's quite an interesting subject. And then I took a teaching course. I went on to do a postgraduate in education. And then I was teaching in secondary schools, science. It was quite fun, you know. It's like you're teaching Set 1, Set 2. They're almost like primary school children. And the whole thing about science, really, it's about a certain kind of play, really. But we have this very fixed set of curriculum, you know. You got to follow the syllabus. So most of the time, you find that you're just catching, you know, trying to meet that kind of KPI to teach what needs to be taught. And that kind of play is is lost. Well, what I try to do in a way is that, you know, I cover everything as much as I can because it's just facts, right? And in those days, there's no internet, so you don't get students. You can't tell students, you go and look it up on the internet. Right now, it's so different. So basically, you have to cover the facts, and then that's where we can have a little bit of fun. You know? But I do find that there's a limit to what I can do in class, and there is that sense of loss, like you're missing something, because I am primarily a science-based person. And that's where I decided that maybe a bit of art education would be good, because, as I said, we have good teachers and definitely not good art teachers, because art has always been used to replace something else in school. You never get a really good art experience. And we're talking about the 70s, yeah? Maybe too young, too old for some of you. So in a sense, that's why that drove me to kind of like go into NAFA, because I think at that time, NAFA was around. It's called St. Pat's Art Center.
That's right.
But, well, I went to NAFA. And I think that sort of, it's a very traditional sort of system, so it's about that kind of one towards many, that kind of classroom situation, almost like an art academy. And then I majored in Chinese ink painting, which is even worse, you know, and I really go into the very traditional format where we had to copy our teacher's work. And really, if you think about it, it's a way to really drill you into the skill, but it can be very restrictive. And so I don't think I was a good student. And I think my teacher, they're very kind. They condone me, yeah. I think in a way, for the older generation, the way they teach art is very different. Because they have this set of skills, so they want to just let you know, you know, transmit the skill to you, as if it can kind of like flow through by osmosis. And we'll just have to copy it, you know, that sort of thing. And it was good. I think in a way it's good. It helped me to be more grounded because I was all over the place, right? So I think that kind of art education system was interesting. It's quite a cultural, not really a shock, but it's something different. It's different. And then after I finished, I went to do my MFA in Goldsmiths College, which is totally different. This is a studio base. And there's a lot more critique, there's tutorial, and I was really enjoying myself because that was what was missing in the old traditional way. Because when I was in Chinese ink painting, it's always about that sort of, it's very singular, sort of directional mode of transmission. It's always from the teacher to the student, and then you do your job. But there's no coming, you know, there's just no back and forth. One of the stories I think I told Erica was that my Chinese ink major lecturer, he looked at my creative work and he says, I don't get it. And there's no way of, how can I explain to him? And that's where I realized there's a need of a system. And when we were doing it when I was doing my MFA in Britain, that's where I understand that, okay, that's why we have a studio practice session, and that's where we need that contextual file. And it was when then I came back to Singapore and I started teaching in NAFA, and that was the time, because NAFA was in it's still kind of like in a transitional sort of stage. So from a very traditional one, that kind of like atelier system, it's transitioning to more modular system, etc. And through that sort of transition, through that kind of like working with what's happening in NAFA, it was quite interesting because I get to be instrumental in actually formulating my ideal, ideal art education into NAFA. I know there are people who really hate the way that NAFA is going. Really, there are people who did come and tell me that, oh, it's so sad, you do not have major studios anymore. People are not learning the skills. And it is important because right now, the skills learning, you can actually get it from the internet. And students are very resourceful. You don't need to ask them to copy a bamboo composition 10 or 20 times anymore.
The emulation part of it is not really kind of enforced now, right?
I feel that, yes, art making is about time, right? And to be honest, you can't have that sort of emulation within that 3 years of a diploma education also. It's a lifelong thing. So I think that what we should focus more is about art making. Because it's no longer about skill. It is about making art.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I feel like so much of art making is about asking questions, just being comfortable to ask questions. And I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of Singaporean students come with that baggage of not feeling at ease to just say, I don't know. So I often tell them, I say, I don't know a lot of things, no? That's why I'm always asking questions, and that's why it's important to just go down the rabbit hole, go down into these different diverging paths of this abyss. You never know what you might find. And I think what you said about the balancing play, being grounded, having time. I feel like very often as artists, as educators, I'm also seeing it in my students. I mean, this can be something we all struggle with. So it's also about assuring them that they don't need to come up with perfectly resolved answers or works or things that what you think your lecturer wants, because that is something that they also need to unlearn.
This second guessing the lecturer, it's really damaging.
It's a process that I think we're all doing together. And I mean, I feel like Mike and I were talking about this being elder millennials, right? And I'm sure we'll go into the conversation about generation soon, right?
Yes.
Just I guess also seeing how these pedagogical shifts that have happened in when we were students in the early years when we were teaching, and TikTok. What more can I say? The time that we're in now, how things are also shifting, and that there's also that need to come back to what you said earlier about not just science, but I feel like art also requires that continual need to just always review, always just kind of look.
And I think that as teachers, we are not to teach. It's not that kind of like power relationship, it's not hierarchical power relationship, but rather it's about co-creating.
Absolutely,
And I tend to tell them that, you are artists. Though some people will hate it, I have an external assessor who was quite shocked when I said that, they are artists. I think they had this concept.
It's a qualifier.
Yeah, that they are still students. How can they be artists? But they are. I mean, if you look at the idea of artists, they create art, and student artists are still artists because they are creating art. And I see our role more as co-creating with them. I think in a sense that's why they are my colleagues straight away. But I think it's very hard for the students to change that kind of mindset. We grow together. Right. So that's why when we have tutorials and then critique, it's not so much about my idea versus your idea. It's really about how we can create this together.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the best things about teaching art, compared to science. It's really about realizing the vision with them. You go with them. Go through that process of art making with them. And that's why I enjoy, I think that's the key thing that I get from teaching art. I get to see really good art, fresh, very exciting art.
Absolutely.
And the wonderful part is you are in with them all the way through.
I think that just echoing the both of you and also Mike, this idea of reflexivity, we're constantly looking back at our own processes or the process of art making, and that is the rich part. And sometimes just reminding our students to be open to the happy accidents through play, through experimentations, as opposed to, and you get quite a lot of students because of the education system that we are in the primary and secondary school system. They tend to want very clear, linear outcome. So then we have to say, hang on a second, stop and smell the roses.
Or the countdown.
Or the countdown along the way.
And that's important too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but I guess maybe what we're all talking about is really this holding space, right? I think this holding is like almost like a sandbox for them to fail, spectacularly, to succeed mildly, yeah. So I think it's I'm quite interested to kind of find out, how do you then hold this space? We do think that, oh yes, of course they can, but then there is also the system, and we do get a lot of students who may not function so well in the very traditional education system, especially maybe even for Mike, right? How do you sort of hold space for them? How do you make them feel safe with you, and then allow them to be vulnerable at the same time? Maybe you could share a little bit about that. Invite Mike to do so.
So I think one of the things I do in my class, for all the art students, we ask them to keep a sketchbook, a journal, and this way is for them to not really finishing anything. It's just really for them to see their own process over time. Over 4 years, they can really see the difference, how they think and how they process ideas and how they draw, how they paint. The idea is not get them to finish the project, but it's for them to find their own way of experimenting. And I often sometimes I show them my own sketchbook, and it's really for them to see, actually, I fail all the time on a daily basis, but it's okay, it's fine. It's really for yourself to judge where do you want to go with this. And it's okay to own up to your own mistake and failures, knowing that, just do again. So therefore the word practice, I think, is very important. It's not just an assignment, it's a practice over time.
It's a process. Adeline?
I find that, again, very often they want us to tell them everything. And we're not there precisely. We are facilitators or we are co-creators, as you've said. But really, it's, for me, one of the key things as I'm teaching and being aware of my own position, 20 over years of teaching in LaSalle, for example, I have to tell myself to constantly be curious, but to also acknowledge that there are things that we don't know, and in the process of saying that, we go back and we learn together. We unlearn, we find out, and we stay curious about such things. That's the joy.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
So actually the educator needs to be vulnerable as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think when you're talking about self-reflexivity, that's super important as well, because I feel like something that I do bring up in class a lot is, really also being aware of the blind spots, our own blind spots, of our privilege, of our positionality, of the gaps in our own knowledge, and how we can talk through some of these spaces of discomfort. Because I feel that with younger students, I think they're getting a lot more sort of driven to also address broader social, cultural, political issues. So how do we hold space? How do we, try to keep that space open and allow for a broad range of views, to allow for debate, for the inevitable vexations of people not agreeing with each other, and I think that's fine. So it's also assuring them that this is fine. To disagree is not it's not a form, it's not a negative thing necessarily.
It's quite productive.
How do we scaffold this form of more discursive debate within these spaces, especially if we're drawing from personal histories that may kind of have elements of trauma, So it's just these things which I feel like I've become a lot more aware of in recent years. And I don't think you can ever be fully trained for this. You just have to learn on the spot and fail sometimes. And I also have to say, I think I've been very lucky to have really lovely students who also will check back in with me after the class. So I will send them an email, then they also send me an email and say, like, that was a very difficult discussion. And I was like, so it's very sweet, especially this last year. I have to say there were really lovely students in my class there was a lot of checking in after class.
And I think that's the thing when we review that vulnerable aspects of us. That's where they can empathize.
Yes.
And that's how they learn too.
Yeah.
And
That it's okay, right?
Yes, that's okay. And I think that's a wonderful thing about teaching art. And I really feel that, well, this is maybe if the Ministry of Education is listening to that, that this mode of teaching, this way of teaching art, which is through discussion, through general, like critique even, that is actually a healthy way to learn things. And you can actually apply it for science. And I really think that you'll be good.
Yeah. I wanted to just pick on your point earlier. And I'm thinking about how sometimes when we are approaching things in the ways that we see meaningful, part of our work also is, as educators, is also to negotiate with larger systems in place. And we sometimes need to push or suggest or present to them other modes because, like decolonial practices in education, so that the more administrative bureaucratic side of the institutions also understand that there are newer modes of thinking, perspectives, voices that ought to be acknowledged.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So that's
just want to jump in. I mean, I feel like these newer modes of thinking, they're extremely important, but it's also extremely important to not use them as buzzwords. Just use them just as these signposts for we're being inclusive. Word of the year. That I feel is the harder work.
Exactly.
That's where the great labor again of needing to negotiate these things, navigate how we are sort of working through the intricacies of these labyrinths of just thinking about these different modes of learning and how do we also kind of open up curriculum syllabus so that it's a lot more inclusive of a broader range of ideas, positions, perspectives. So I feel like that's something which again it comes back to the point I made earlier about our own blind spots of privilege, our own sort of being really self-reflexive. I think that it's also important to be self-reflexive about being self-reflexive.
Yes, clearly.
I think one of the things is, I think sometimes we not kind of assume how other people learn. I think it's going to be a very different experience altogether, especially the generational part, where I think in school we emphasize on first-hand studies, like if you are interested in this thing, you draw it. But sometimes I feel like that's a blind spot on my part where they live in a world where images is in abundance. They can find any images. And stock image is a thing. It's a conceptually, it's a very interesting object that exists. So how do I explain, how should I tell them when they say relying too much on, say, internet searches? Am I right to tell them not to? I feel conflicted, but I think those are good questions. Eventually, hopefully they can find their own way of figuring out those things. But as teacher, as educator, you just sort of tell them different perspectives.
But I think it's really is very important, especially right now, this digital age. All these stock images, how we use them, this idea of ownership, etc. How do we negotiate? And that's where it's a good way to start discussing what can be done.
I think also just going to quickly say, I feel like, I'm sure we'll get to this part of the conversation soon, like how this last year and a half has been so screen-based. So many of us have had, even studio classes moved online. So just, I feel like getting students to be more aware of, more polysensorial ways of just engaging and experiencing space. Sometimes for the class, I'll be like, okay, so just go for a walk after this. Document your walk.
Oh, wow.
I can already. This is, I mean, it's part. I feel like it's super important, especially in these times.
Yeah.
Because you're so disembodied.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you know, some of them would write me quite emotional emails saying, you know, we've only been seeing our classmates just on screens. We've never even met you in person. You know? So it's just, I guess, some ways to also, you know, get people to also think about experiencing the world beyond the screen. I think it's very important for ourselves as well.
Yeah, I think we used to get notes, right? But then now it's emails. So I think maybe we talk about the next thing, which is this idea about like, you know, the generations. You know, I mean, of course, there's an increasing gap, right? As you know, so the students always seem to be getting younger. And I remember maybe even when we were students, right? It's like, oh, checking things on the internet, how not, you know, that's not credible and that's totally, yeah, you know, you're just being lazy. But then I think now it's very, very much legitimate. And then I think Mike brought up a really fantastic point about how do we decide? Because we often teach the way we always teach the way we were taught as well. So how do you seem to find yourself changing with each generation of students that come in or adapt?
I think a lot of it is experimenting. You know, you really have to experiment as you go, and it's true. They're getting younger, and the gap is bigger.
Sek-Chern, you have a TikTok, right?
I don't have a TikTok. As I said, I'm just a consumer of that. But my daughter uses it. But it's so fun with all these filters and all that, and it's really the possibility of being a real content creator. You know, with all this technology, it's exciting. And let's experiment. I mean, even as we teach, allow them to have that. You know, why give them that restriction? Oh no, you cannot use this source or whatever. Just use it, but you have to account for it. Tell me how.
I think for me, it's a very good gauge is my 16-year-old son. How do I stay relevant with what's happening with his world, right, or his worldview? So the best thing, and I've approached it in many ways, like how teaching has been for me, is to just constantly stay curious, read up, find out, because I don't know many things. And so by just acknowledging that I can't know, but I will find out for you, and especially at master's level, when they come in, they are already very specialized. So then it's also about getting to know their research matter, and we learn together, right? And asking questions. Back to just asking questions.
Sometimes we just have to stay humble and ask.
Okay, I guess maybe the next question is, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of emulation versus empowerment. I think some of the really, you know, for myself, maybe like educators who have really impacted me, artist educators, I would of course really be in love with their techniques and in love with, you know, and I seem to, of course, even amongst peers, right, you would find yourself going in a similar direction. I mean, is that something that you have experienced, or is it something you actively discourage, or how do you feel about that? Do you advise them to kind of move away or try to seek their own path?
I think it's important for, at least in my own classes, to not be a cultural gatekeeper. So it's, because again, coming back to what I said earlier about, it's easy to use some of these terms as buzzwords. It's easy to just kind of throw in all of this jargon and art speak, you know, to justify a work. But so, I mean, I do like, on an optimistic day, I do like to think that, you know, I think even if 10 people are looking at a very similar source material or subject matter, but, you know, we will draw from our own lived experience. Ideally, we will draw from what is immediate from within us and around us. So that could also make certain distinctions. But I guess, again, it's a lot about being self-reflexive. It's a lot about also not just staying within your own tunnel vision of yourself. So I think coming back to what I think everyone has been saying about just having the space for dialogue, discussion, criticality is very important.
I agree absolutely. I find that because, I mean, one of the key things, because of the pedagogical model right? That we've inherited with our Euro-American, primarily Euro-American models of teaching. I find that we do ask students to look at references that they can relate to, artist reference or historical theoretical references. But at the end of it all, they also need to specify or to let us know what is their position, what is their uniqueness. And that's not that difficult actually, when you come from a position of honesty where you say, okay, there's no two Zarina, right? We will then be able to get them to think more about their positioning, personal positioning as a starting point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like emulation is a way to learn. Right? We learn through emulating what others have done, and I mean that's one way. Yeah, students learn. Of course, bringing in their own perspective, their lived experience. That's what makes it uniquely theirs, and that's what we also try to encourage.
Just a funny thought. I think I should get my students to copy my work. I've never thought about that.
That would be a nice
It's really weird, right?
Yeah, very strange assignment. They were probably just whine the whole time. But
Yeah.
I have some of your students who are now mine, and they loved it when I said, okay, so for this week you have to go and see this exhibition, Mike Chang's exhibition. They were like, hi Chang, the artist, the educator, my teacher, I said, okay, good.
I don't really talk about my work a lot. I mean, if they're interested, of course I'm happy to. But really, there are so many other examples I'm more happy to talk about.
Yeah.
But if there's something that I feel like, for example, if the work deals with humor or something like that, maybe I might show something that I've done. But beyond that, I really don't use my work as an example very much. Yeah.
But students find their way. They pretty much Google
Yeah.
you before they start.
Oh, that's research. I get them to
That's
Google.
research,
Right?
yes.
One of the earlier exercises I used to do with the foundation students when I was teaching them art theory was to, and this was the age, when Google just started, I said, just go and Google yourself and see what's out there. Right? That's like you would also find out about yourself a little bit more. Yeah, but another thing that I find equally important is to kill the angel in the house. Whoever you may have emulated or really liked, you can't be like that person, right? Otherwise, you're just a copier, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kill. You have to kill. All the models. Role models.
We all start with this artist that we all love and emulate, and then eventually, as we grow, we have to kill him or her.
Yeah.
And that's where we can progress further and find ourselves.
Find ourselves, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I hear all this and I can sense the amount of labor that goes into this, so much listening, thinking, scaffolding, facilitating, and on top of that, transmitting knowledge and content, right? We are also some of the original content creators for them. But I want to just find out then, everyone's like really active practitioners. This sense of labor, right? How do you kind of balance that? Because they occupy very different headspace. I think if I'm right to say, like teaching has its own administration and problem solving, and so does art making. But how do you I'm not sure if balance is the right word, but really work together with these two practices.
Yeah.
Anyone like to start?
I've described my practice as being akin to a multi-headed hydra. I've also described that about myself. So I feel like it's not always easy. Let's all be honest. But sometimes it's just about letting some of the heads just chill, give them a drink, tell them, okay, not today. Today you just meditate in silence, and just assigning which days for each specific sort of window in my mind to be, which tab to be open and active. So I feel like it's a constant thing that we're all doing.
I think for me, just within the past year and a bit with the pandemic, it was very clear that certain ideas have to take a back seat. And I began looking at things that were closer to home because of the lockdown and various stages of me being anxious about immunity, I just did a lot more walks in and around. So there have been quite a number of works that came out from just the lockdown. As have you actually.
Walking?
Mike, yeah.
I was just thinking about your solo exhibition, right? And the lockdown
Right.
drawings.
Yeah, I'm more productive when I'm not teaching. Yeah, it's I don't know. It's both our labors, but it occupies very different energy.
Absolutely.
But eventually, I feel like they kind of met somewhere. Like like it's about sharing. It's about some kind of passion for something. So when I teach Sec 4, they have this year-long coursework, and that's when I take a backseat. I really focusing my time helping them to produce something, because they're quite young. So I really have to do a few things in terms of labor and manufacturing, things like that.
Right.
So it's about finding where if you have the mindset to support, then I'm okay to take a backseat and vice versa. So it's not easy, but somehow we'll manage.
You'll be quite agile.
Yes, you have to be flexible. You have to be okay to say no to things. Yeah.
I think as artists, we don't really switch off. Really, I think that for myself, as whether I'm teaching or whether I'm making art, in a way they kind of complement each other. Things I'm thinking when I'm doing my art, some of the problems I encounter, I actually tend to carry it into my teaching, which maybe is a bad thing to have that kind of lack of boundary. But in some sense, it does get into it. And the way I look at teaching is like, it isn't teaching, right? It's co-creating. And I'm co-creating my own practice as I'm teaching. And I think that helps me a lot in the way I grow as an artist. And so in that sense, I'm ambivalent about it really, whether I should have that kind of clear boundary. On the one hand, yes, I don't have a life, right? On the other hand,
You said it. That's the line of the day.
it is my life, so I think that's the thing, yeah.
Yeah. So I think all of us actually have the learner's license as well. I think we are also learning from our students. I think we're getting a lot out of it, right?
Yeah.
Do you agree? And how do your students' practices also affect yours? Is there such a thing happening, or has it happened before?
I think quite a bit. It's a mutually enriching process for most part. Yes, we've had like some really awful teaching experiences too. But we look forward to if you have like a dozen students a year or during foundation time, I had 450 students. If I have 5% that have benefited from what I've shared with them, I'm happy. And I find that going to school each day, I look forward to it. So, this Zoom style is also quite disheartening because what I look forward to are my peers, my colleagues, because in chatting and sharing, you get ideas and things that are being bounced off. And with my students, I find that sometimes when they share with me their perspective, it's something that I didn't think of, and I'm like, wow, why didn't I think of that? And that keeps me excited, right?
It's very energizing.
Okay, maybe I'm going to take some questions. I think we've had quite a few questions that I would
Lots
take
of questions.
on. Yes. Okay, a very pragmatic question. Can an art school education help students who do not go on to become artists? Yeah, that's a very good one.
I think a lot of my students, after graduating, they don't really become like full-time artists.
Yeah,
But I think the spirit of art making is in them. They look upon the world differently. So I say that is more important than carrying on and be an artist. They might not be full-time artists now, but we can't be sure, right? That maybe they will have a full-time practice when they are like 50 years old, 60 years old.
Yeah.
Why not?
It's a way of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I do tell, assure my students, especially the diploma students who are very anxious, should I do my BA, should I take a break, should I do something else, that there are no specific pathways and models. Yes, we need to focus on the pragmatic, but I think when we think about sustainability, it's not just, it's financial, obviously, very important, right?
Absolutely.
But, psychological, mental, spiritual, like the whole works of it, all the layers of it is very important. And I do say that, just because you may not be practicing in the way that you think right away, it doesn't make you any less of someone who creates. So it's just, I absolutely agree with you as well, that I think really getting them to think beyond these very linear pathways, that their value is tied to their productivity, to how many exhibitions they are involved in. It's something that I think even we have to kind of remind ourselves and unlearn, because it's such a cultural consciousness.
You are not what you produce only.
Yes,
Absolutely
exactly. Yeah, and I would also say that over the years, one of the key things that for some of us who are pushing quite a bit is to make sure that our students are versatile. That way, when they leave, it doesn't matter which pathway you go to, but it's actually quite liberating. If you don't believe in set pathways and outcomes, you can just bravely go and do what you need to do. So we've had quite a number of fine arts graduates, for example, from BA, MA, who are into visual merchandising, various types of enterprises. So it's not a cut and dry thing.
It's a way of thinking also that you're inculcating.
Yeah, I don't really think about training artists because they are very, very young. So, but it's about us. Yeah, it's about asking questions. Don't take things for granted. I think that's very important. Don't accept things just because it has been. So one assignment I gave to my students was I asked them to design a tattoo for me.
Oh, what? Sorry?
A tattoo.
A tattoo.
But as a teacher, I'm actually not supposed to have any visible tattoos.
Yes.
But I asked this question because I wanted to think about why this is, and not to reject tattoos straight away, because it can be a form of art, and it's really for them to think about why do I have such sort of biases, where did it come from, who said these biases, and as a thought exercise, that can bring onto many other subjects in life, I think. And so it's about asking questions. It can be visual, it can be anything that they encounter later on.
And it's also about learning about the histories of this region, because for the first years we're looking at, like 1 week we look at the history of mark making on the body, and students don't realize that there's actually a lengthy history within this region. This is not something that's imported from somewhere else. So this is something that we also, I feel like getting them to also understand the histories of this region, so local, regional, global, it's important as well.
That grounding, right?
Yeah.
And I think as artists, we're acute of, we're trying to be observed of all these things. But as a young person, sometimes they're not so aware. And it's about give them that leeway to start thinking about those things on their own.
So in many ways, we are imparting a sense of critical skills, right? Through our teaching, through the ways that we provoke them or get them to think, ask questions.
Yeah, I think I also may like to add this part is that also it takes a village, right? It's I think for example, this exhibition is not just about the artist. There are all these people coming together to put the show together, writing about it. So I think an art education also creates a lot of these other sort of roles which are just as important in this, right? Yeah. Okay, maybe another question. Do you believe in a canon that the students need to learn, right? So they need to, like you were mentioning, they have to learn all the basics before they can be qualified in a way to experiment with new forms and discover their own style? Is there like a baseline that you think they should accomplish first? What are your thoughts on that?
Wow.
I think in teaching like art history, art theory, at least in LaSalle, it's the canon is used as a signpost, but it's also at the same time we're simultaneously questioning the canon. We're also connecting these canonical works that qualify as high art. Yes, important, right? as with contemporary works, so that there's also, the students hopefully can be able to see that kind of connections across time and space, across different cultural contexts as well. So yeah, for me, I think, at least in my classes, whether we're looking at a theoretical text, like for art theory or for contextual studies, it is important, but it's also important at the same time to question it.
Yes, right.
To unpack it.
To unpack it.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
That's a very important part about education.
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, like the thing about canon, really, it is like we can study them,
Yeah.
but emulating them is another thing. I think, like, let's say, right now with information so easily available, I want to learn about Raphael's technique. I think I can easily research and find out for myself.
YouTube.
Yes, but when it comes to really like critical thinking, things like critical thinking, things like researching skills, like what are some of the things that we need to look at, and the ability to assess and understand, observe, and all that. I don't think you can do that online. So the idea of canon, how we work with the canon, I think that's more important than like emulating them to that certain level. Right?
And raising questions about power, because the canon, after all, is a reflection of power.
Yes.
So I have students asking me, the canon, actually, why mostly men?
And that's a good question.
Exactly.
Start them thinking about why, and then they'll
why are
research
these
more
categories
about
that
the
are mostly of,
society.
showcasing certain individuals and not others? So how can we also think about these categories that have been omitted, repressed, just taken out, and not take these things for granted? So back to what Mike was saying, right? That we don't just take things as they are just because they've always been.
And that's more valuable than to actually what do you call it? Emulating that,
Right.
wanting to be like that kind of level of skill. That's not helpful at all.
I think one of the other things that we have tried to do is to highlight the blind spots in the historical or theoretical frameworks that we've inherited in art schools. And then having said that, we are also acknowledging that we have our own blind spots, our own preferences. But I think as an educator, we have to be so aware that yes, we may have our own agenda, our own ideological positioning, but it is our responsibility to put forth the different frameworks or the different critiques and conversations possible.
Yes.
And then, letting them fly with.
Yeah, so it's about making very informed kind of choices, right? And also questions on these, like, perhaps the more mainstream and acknowledged thinking. All that. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, maybe we have just time for one or two more questions. And this is for Mike, actually. When comparing with like both the US and Taiwan, I think what are the differences between these two regions and Singapore in terms of like people's attitude towards art and also art education is a big one.
I don't know.
Okay.
I left Taiwan a long time ago. I visited, but I have not been in the school system or the art.
Yeah.
I don't really know. I have also left States for a long time. What's the question? What's the difference?
What's the difference between people's attitude towards art and art education as compared to Singapore?
I feel like I lived here so long, I kind of forgot all those things. Attitudes. I'm not very sure today actually. But I think I try. My own sort of upbringing or education has been very sort of quite open.
Yep.
Like even my own parents didn't tell me very much of how to understand things. They really left me alone to explore a lot of things, and that's sort of my education as well. I really did a lot of exploring on my own, and I think that's sort of the same way I feel like my students should take up is their sort of ownership of they should go as far as they could in terms of exploring their own interests, and if there happens to be a teacher that can sort of help and great. But it's really, I mean, my own feeling about students these days, especially art students, is that they don't have a lot of time. They're really very busy people.
Yeah.
They're like 15, they're much busier than I ever was. I wish I can find them time to slow down, to observe, to think. When I was their age, I mean, I don't know, I don't have a phone, so I just listen to music all day long, and that's how I learn. And so I hope young people can have more time. Yeah, that's not looking at a screen or watching YouTubers or Twitch or playing video games. Even though I also love video games, but yeah, finding time for their own and for their mind to wander. And sometimes media control us how we think a lot, and our mind stops to work on its own. And I think that's the danger of for young artists. Is that.
Maybe you need more boredom and some space.
Yeah, you need your own space and time. Yeah.
So I guess maybe we can, this is your very last question to everyone is, so what do you think now at this moment? I think we're in really very exceptional times. What do you think is actually very necessary and urgent at this time to discuss with your students? What is particular at this point in time? We talked a lot about care. We also talked a lot about critical thinking. What would you like to discuss with that? It could be outside of the arts. Maybe we can just close off with this question.
I think for me, at least, it's these last few months, it's a lot about being aware of how the arts is connected to these bigger, broader systems, politically, socially. Whether we're looking at gender-based violence, racial justice, a lot of these more complex geopolitical sort of issues across these, beyond our little island. And I feel like students have been a lot more open as well and receptive to talking about it, bringing also I think it will be perennially unresolved sort of, thoughts about this, feelings about this, the complicated sort of ways in which we're navigating through this time. So for me, I feel like it's also about, kind of scaffolding these ideas or the realities that art is connected. We don't exist within our own little vacuum of just I, me, myself, and my feelings and my expressions, right? It's a lot more sort of political.
Okay, thank you. Adeline?
I find that one of the key things, at least, that has kept me sane, and so I try to also remind some of my younger students, BA students primarily, is this idea of finding pleasure in what you do. And maybe it's also because the daily realities can be so harsh for some of us, and we come from different backgrounds. So therefore, this need to, when you're making your work, when you're making your art, it's important to carve out that space where you have that jouissance, that joy, or that pleasure. So that will sustain you longer than anything else, any class that you've learned in school, for example.
That's a constant, right, in your life that you can inculcate.
Yeah, and I think it's quite nice to see various writers and practitioners coming back to this idea. So Adrienne Marie Brown and pleasure activism. So looking back at the different writers and theorists, critical thinkers that I came across in art school in the 90s. So it's quite nice.
Researchers.
Researchers. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I just kind of like build up from that. Like, yes, that to be more aware that we are connected to the world and that we're just not isolated, even though a lot of time we are in isolation sometimes, especially with COVID-19 situation. And also this idea about finding the joy, I like that. I think to build on that, I would remind them that at this point especially, it's important to exercise a bit of self-care. To keep oneself, because if you want to carry on, you want to make art, one needs to be physically and mentally healthy. And so they have to, in a way, if they have an issue, trying to cope, they should reach out. A lot of the times, I think, in these times especially, we feel that we're all alone and they don't reach out. So yes, I said to reach out to hopefully someone, adult, who knows how to deal with it and to work with your problem. And I think that self-care is important.
Yeah.
What's urgent? What's NFT? No, I'm kidding. I thought about talking about NFT to my students, but then I thought not yet. I'm not ready. But anyway, I like to show this video to my students. It's a TED Talk by Roman Mars. He's a podcaster for this show called 99% Invisible. And for this talk, he talked about good flag design, city flags. So basically the conclusion is that good design bring people together, good art bring people together. And I think that's, especially now, I think there are so many things going on. It can be very confusing and troubling. But if you have good design and good art, it can become the banner that a lot of people rally together under. So I think that's sort of a nice way to think about what do we do with art. It can impact people more than you think, and that can be a very powerful thing. And sometimes I think, as individuals, sometimes we might not think we have that power.
Yes.
But actually, it's possible to change people, to influence people in the right way.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I think we will continue to make good art, and whatever art is, right? And also we'll continue to kind of think about working with people, changing students' mindsets. And I just want to thank everyone for spending your precious last Saturday with us today. And thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. The last one, not the last laugh.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.